Do you know what we're supposed to do with suffering? We're supposed to feel it, because in feeling it, we transform it. Every one of us have experienced loss. Why not use that fact to drive us together rather than apart? I can't think of a better way to prepare myself for my granddaughter's arrival than to come into a new relationship with my own father, so that I can be that much more settled, that much more whole, so I can be an ancestor worthy of my descendants. That wounding and heartbreak are a part of the process of growing up. It is not the enemy. It is the hand of a friend. Don't worry about being perfect. The effort matters, even if you fail.
Well, Jerry, this conversation feels deeply personal. A friend sent me your interview some time back with Lenny at a time when I was carrying a lot of pain. And your question, how have I been complicit in creating the conditions I say I don't want, hit me like a mirror I didn't know I needed. And it didn't bring blame, it brought agency. Not shame, but the strength to choose again. And that moment became a turning point, not just for my own healing, but for the work we now do through the Endurance movement. And I reached out not knowing if I'd hear back. But what came next, Jerry, was one of the most meaningful exchanges I've had since losing my son, Anthony. You wrote back to me, "He is not to be forgotten by anyone." And that line sat right in my chest, Jerry. And your presence today during your sabbatical, your visit with your daughter, and in alignment with your Bodhisattva vow to help alleviate suffering is not just generous, it's a model of what grief-led leadership can look like. For those who may be meeting you for the first time, Jerry Colonna is a former venture capitalist turned executive coach, and he's the founder of Reboot. He's the author of a tremendous book called Reboot, Leadership and the Art of Growing Up, and most recently, Reunion, Leadership and the Longing to Belong. Jerry's work invites us to lead with emotional honesty, to integrate grief and reckoning as part of our leadership, not as a detour, but as the path itself. So from the bottom of my heart, Jerry, thank you for answering the call. It's an honor to have you here, and welcome to the Endurance Show.
Oh, thank you for having me. And Neil, I remember getting your email, and I think I said something else, which was, how could I say no? You know, when someone opens their heart and endeavors to do the work of a lifetime, which is to turn pain and suffering into something medicinal for other people, I mean, that's what it's all about. That's life. So.
Well, thank you. And I'm just grateful you answered the call, and so too have others. And it really feels so much bigger than my wife and I and our son, Anthony. And as we exchanged, we lost our teenage son, Anthony, to suicide. He was facing high functioning autism. And from the outside world, he appeared not only normal, but thriving. He had a 4.6 grade point average, was beloved by friends. In fact, his friends were shocked, said if this could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. He was deep into martial arts and also went to the gym every morning. But one of the things that we noticed, especially as suicidal ideation became part of his story, was this black and white thinking and this sense of he kept trying to achieve more, whether it was another marathon or another Spartan race. But what we noticed was what I would call the science of achievement. He set out and would achieve more, but it lacked that art of fulfillment. And it seems so similar to, what I've understood about your journey and your experience and what you share around, achievement versus fulfillment. Wonder if we could start there.
Sure. And the first thing I would want to say is just to honor the uniqueness of Anthony's journey. I don't mean to take anything away from his own experience, but I'll do my best to respond empathetically by sharing my own journey in that way.
Thank you.
You know, your comment about him falling into a kind of black and white thinking, I think is wise and important to note. We do live in a world that almost encourages a black and white thinking, and it splits the world into good and bad. It splits the world, it splits ourselves into all good or all bad. And I know from my own experience that my own experience of depression, my own suicide attempt at 18, my battle with depression, I would often see myself as, I'm from Brooklyn, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to curse.
This is a safe place to curse. Let's do
Amen,
it.
brother. I would often see myself as a piece of shit or something great. And the truth is, neither was true. Right? I was never as shitty as I thought I was. And I was never as great as I thought I was. But even more, what comes to mind is something you read Reboot, so you know her. There was a woman in my life named Dr. Sayers. She was my psychoanalyst. And she came into my life when I was 30 years old. And she left my life on a conscious basis only 7 years ago, when at 93 she passed away. And she used to say all the time that the capacity to hold love and hate simultaneously is a sign of mental health. And I think the relevance to this notion of the struggle about how we see ourselves is that the capacity to see ourselves as whole, having good parts and bad parts, or being both, is really, really important. And I think that those of us who battle depression, one of the things that is a little underdeveloped is our capacity to see the goodness even in the middle of our most challenging feelings. So that's a long-winded response to a very thought-provoking question.
No, and I appreciate the depth, and I also appreciate you sharing your personal story of suicidal ideation and an attempt about the same age as Anthony. He was 16 and a half. So when we lost Anthony and in the months that followed, I really felt this pressure both internally and externally to kind of get back to being strong, to get back to being a leader. But the deeper I allowed myself to feel, the more that I really felt I began to uncover leadership in the grief itself. Was there a moment in your own journey where staying with the grief rather than rushing past it changed something essential in you?
I don't know that there was a moment per se. I think the way I would describe it is that we are all in a process of coming into relationship with grief that is different than that which is sold to us like a bill of goods from the world at large. Grief, I'm reminded of two things. I'm reminded of something that Parker Palmer, who is one of the most important teachers in my life, writes about in his book, Let Your Life Speak. He tells the story of his own battle with depression. And I think it's applicable to this understanding of grief that we're talking about. In the middle of his life, he had what he describes as his third significant bout of depression. And he goes to see his therapist, and his therapist says something to him that I find really helpful. His therapist said, "Parker, is it possible to not see your depression as the enemy, but as the hand of a friend forcing you down to the ground and telling you to sit still and feel what you need to feel? Now, if you just hold on to that for a moment, we live in a world, whether it's through psychedelics or the latest trend, we live in a world that teaches us to move past difficult feelings as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And if we see depression, if we see grief as a necessary companion that actually has our best interest at heart. The fear that we have is that if we give over to depression, if we give over to grief, we'll be swallowed up forever and ever. But the opposite is true. If we allow the necessary grieving process, it is, in a sense, what it was that I was reaching for when I responded to your email. It is a way for us to honor that which we have lost. Whether it's a person, a dream, an experience of the world, grief is a foundational component of the human experience.
It's so fascinating. And as you were sharing that, I was reminded of a feeling that I had early on in this. And I would liken it to people. I'm a pretty energetic guy and outgoing and an extrovert. And in early conversations and early experiences, and I'm so grateful to be reminded of it right now, I spoke often about like how this knocked me down, like I was on the mat, and on the early days, I couldn't even press my hands to look up. So I would just be like looking around, and then I could get to a point where almost like in Cobra, I could press myself up and be looking around. And I felt, even as I started get back into day-to-day life and resuming raising our daughter and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next with my career, and I felt like a different perspective and almost I don't know how to describe it, but I I didn't want to get all the way back up. Like I feel like even on my best days, I appreciate like a good solid knee. You know what I mean? Like being on one knee, because that experience is still with me. And I guess I'm learning to carry both. And so I just had this visual that I was being brought back to as you shared that really resonated with me
Well,
because
it sounds, Neil, like you're
yeah,
befriending your grief,
yes.
not seeing it as the enemy, but as the hand of a friend.
Yes. And speaking of a hand of a friend, I think where I was really fortunate and blessed too is to be surrounded by friends and community. So, when Anthony attempted to take his life, uh, he hung himself, but a passerby found him, and first responders were able to resuscitate him. But his brain injuries were quite significant. He was hospitalized for 9 weeks, and during this time, the friends and family, the community that came to us and came around us, it felt like there was stuff I had to walk through, but that there were multiple arms under my armpits carrying us. And I feel really blessed and fortunate to have been surrounded by so much love to be carried through those things I needed to, and to have that space and presence of others to lift us through those difficult times. Um, what I thought was most powerful was a client of mine in the very first couple of days asked if she could she called it an all faiths welcome prayer circle. And it was really powerful. We said yes. And about 75 people showed up, many of whom I didn't know. And it had such a profound impact on Anthony's early on miraculous healing, but on my wife and me, where we felt alone and in the corner in a fetal position, we felt so lifted and loved. And what happened from there is that initial all faiths welcome prayer circle that seemed like it was going to be one time. Then people started to volunteer asking if they could lead one. So we had one every Sunday night about the time when Anthony had attempted, and it was so powerful and profound. And then there would be north of 100 people we wouldn't even know. But what it did for us was in seemingly in a world that's so polarized, especially around religion and such, we were in this space where we transcended religion. So if it was that Jesus died on the cross so that Anthony could, or the Zohar says that Anthony is in favor because of, or in the Buddhist tradition, we believe, or someone who's like, I don't believe in anything, but for myself and my family, what was received through their lens was this just unfiltered feeling of love, and it transcended religion. And for those moments, and in many ways for some who are still around to experience love in its fullness, it seemed that people who used to be so sure that their religion was the way, now we're just speaking about it in a way that we received it as love. And I would say first and foremost, it was the biggest gift in all of this to have all of that removed from us and just experience that pure love and connection. The second thing I would say is it also got my wife and I to start talking about it. There was so many people who were so curious about where we were and how we were doing. We started to share video updates and things that we would never have felt comfortable doing. And it brought us so much healing to talk transparently and openly about it, and then start to receive feedback about how it was helping others.
I'm going to ask a leading question because I think
Sure.
I know the answer. Why would so many people want to participate in this?
I mean, my thought before you answered the question was to answer that we're seemingly blessed, my wife and I, across a few decades of really making close connections with people over the years so that they came to us. But right before those words came out of my mouth, I was struck with something maybe a little bit different that I don't know, but I'll just say it anyways. It just seemed like our hearts were cracked open because of what happened, but it seemed like maybe theirs were too. And so they were taken to a place where they consciously or unconsciously let go of some things that they held on to just to connect in the deepest ways.
I think that that's right. I'm going to tell you a Buddhist tale.
Thank you.
So a mother loses her child. And she goes inconsolably to the Buddha for support. And the Buddha sends her to the village and says, go to every house in the village and take from each house a mustard seed, from every house that has not experienced loss, and then come back to me. And she comes back to the Buddha empty-handed. Now, the point of the story is not to diminish the experience of suffering that you have, but to realize that the experience of suffering you have is what draws us together as a community. You and your wife, just like you and I reach out across time and space through the magic of video.
Yeah.
You and I, or you read my book and you say, wait, I understand. This story is my story.
Yes.
You know, before we were talking about your father being a Brooklyn boy like me.
Yes.
And swapping tales of Sheepshead Bay.
Yeah.
Because the thing about this world, the thing about the experience of our world, especially now, is that there's a false perception, which is that we are more separate than we are together.
Yeah.
And those Sunday nights were an incredible gift that you and your wife gave the community by opening your broken heart to the experience of your suffering so that others can be together with you in that suffering. Because there is not a single household, there's not a single person listening to this conversation whose family or who as an individual hasn't experienced loss. And we forget that when we look at the other person as some sort of threat or somebody bad, or when we divide the world into good and bad. There is no place in the world where human beings haven't experienced loss.
That's right.
And grief.
Yeah.
And sadness and depression. And rather than bringing us down, those Sunday nights brought you together.
Yeah, they did.
That's how we respond to grief, with community. That's why we have rituals. That's why we have funerals. That's why we have gatherings. You know, one of my favorite traditions is my Jewish friends will come back a year after a burial and place a stone, right? To say, I was here. I remember you. You are not forgotten. Nothing we can do, nothing we can say can make the pain go away. But when we experience the pain in isolation, we create more pain, more suffering.
It's so powerful, and I'm so glad that you shared that story, because I've been blessed for 49 and a half years, more or less. Now I'm almost 51, but had been blessed for almost 49 and a half years with little adversity. My parents separated for a couple of years in high school, got back together. Sadly, I lost my best friend to cancer at 34. And I've always felt like a loving, connected guy. And when people would share about a family member, someone close passing or being sick, I would ask their name. I would pray for them. I would send out some intentions, and then I would kind of go on about my business. And then with this unimaginable loss and being cracked open the way I was, I I almost felt like, oh my gosh, like I really wanted to not share platitudes in the past. And I felt like I was doing more, but I felt like I didn't really understand. It was until I didn't have that mustard seed myself. And now with my dad being as sick as he is, and maybe passing, and hardly been a year. It's it's not like I don't have any regret or changed anything, but in some ways I wish I knew or had access to some of the levels of depth and connection that I've just been able to unlock in such a short period of time, and hope to share with others in some way, so that we can cultivate these deeper connections that we're blessed to experience if we allow our hearts to crack open in these difficult times.
The essence of compassion is empathy.
Mm.
And empathy requires two things. The first, of course, is to imagine and understand someone else's feelings. But to really understand it beyond sympathy,
Mhm.
it's to imagine and understand our own experience of suffering.
Mm.
And we, again, live in a world, you use the word platitude. In my experience, the platitudes and the artifice that goes along with how to deal with suffering exacerbate the problem.
Yeah.
I briefly mentioned before the experience of so much of bypassing difficult feelings. It's like we're socialized to push away difficult feelings as quickly as possible. And the leaning into, whether it's depression or grief or sadness, look, your father is in a moment of transition.
Yes.
In Buddhism, we'd say he's entering the bardo. And the bardo is a 49-day period where the essence of the person is in this sort of limbo state, trying to sort through what's happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
We all enter the bardo. Your ancestors have been through the bardo.
Mm-hmm.
And by connecting with the experience of being in the bardo, you can connect not only with your father, but your grandparents and your great-grandparents and your great-great-grandparents and the thousands of ancestors who magically came together to create you, your daughter, your son, all of them standing there welcoming home Vincenzo.
It's so beautiful, and another blessing around that, and the certainty I feel around my dad being welcomed home, and my son Anthony being there to welcome him home, is in the community, in the gifts that we received from countless friends and family members. People wanted to do whatever they could do to help us. So we had no short of 3 people recommending mediums. And my wife and I are really spiritual folks, and we meditate, and we believe in spirit and such. And this seemed like, whoa, but because we were cracked wide open, we were willing to have and experience any of these gifts, and to understand and have that experience of connection is really, really cracked open a whole nother layer. And this is such a cool conversation, because I felt like I wanted to share with our audience, your experience of all this with leadership, which we may get to in this episode or another, but this is really so juicy and meaningful. And I'm curious, I want to go back just a second
Mm-hmm.
to where you were sharing about the idea of empathy and compassion in that space, and almost like the space where someone's passing. I, I'm curious. I felt like when I gave that example of being on the mat and could barely get myself up, because that experience was so shattering. Like, I mean, even thinking about it, like my body just goes cold. I feel like my heart stops, everything about it. But it's almost like I was cracked open so wide and knocked down, like the ability to not being able to get up, and that cracking open, like, caused this all to rush in, and for me to experience it. But what about others where, hopefully, like, it's not so shattering? Is there a way to open and access those types of spiritual connections, or the awareness that's created in that space?
Let me try to answer that or respond to that. I'll tell another story, and you'll remember this story from Reboot. This is a
Yeah.
story Parker Palmer taught me.
Yeah.
So in the story, a student comes to the rabbi and says to the rabbi, "Rabbi, why do the words of the Talmud tell us to place the words of the Torah, the words of God, upon our heart? Why does the Talmud not say, place the words of the Torah within our heart?" And the rabbi responds, well, our hearts being as hard as they are, our hearts have to crack open in order for the words of the God to fall in. I think implicit in your question, Neil, may be a little bit of that bypassing we were talking about before. I think what you're asking is it possible to feel the level of empathy and compassion without having our hearts opened?
Yes, that's what I was trying to get at. Exactly.
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
Because our hearts being as hard as they are, the words of the Torah will land upon the hearts, and they will wait until the heart breaks, until God can fall in. Now, I don't want to romanticize heartbreak. I don't want to say that we all must be wounded in order to grow, right? The subtitle of Reboot is Leadership in the Art of Growing Up. I don't want to say that we have to be wounded in order to grow up. But I want to point out that wounding and heartbreak are a part of the process of growing up. It is not the enemy. It is the hand of a friend. And P.S., it sucks. Being human is hard. But the alternative, to be inhuman, is not pleasant.
No.
We hurt the world when we deny our humanity. Right now, we're living in times, Neil, where it almost feels like there's a war on empathy.
Agreed.
Right? And that, prominent people say the problem is empathy. My God. My God.
Yeah.
The lack of empathy allows us to ignore starvation in children, allows us to ignore a massive rise in depression and anxiety in our teens.
Yeah.
Okay, the problem is not empathy. The problem is not enough empathy. And yeah, it's overwhelming to feel that empathy. You know, being in Buddhism, we talk about bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is open heart. Bodhicitta hurts. It hurts. It hurt all of those people who gathered on a Sunday night to hold you and your wife and Anthony in their hearts. It hurt. And what a privilege to hurt in that way. What a privilege it is to feel somebody else's suffering. You know, I keep quoting Parker. Parker's, my favorite thing that Parker has ever said is that violence is what we do when we don't know what to do with suffering. Do you know what we're supposed to do with suffering?
Well, please tell me. I've been thinking a lot about suffering and
we're supposed to feel it.
Yes. Yes.
Your suffering, my suffering, the world's suffering. We're supposed to feel it. Because in feeling it, we transform it. Just like you and your wife are doing. You are bravely leaning into the sharp edge of your own suffering so that you can say, what good can we make of this? Which child in the future will benefit from knowing, from the work that you're doing, from a conversation that you're having with somebody, so that some parent knows the right thing to say to interrupt that black and white thinking, to interrupt the suicidal ideation, to save a soul.
To save a soul. Jerry, there's so much magic in heart in what you've shared, and seeds of the endurance movement, because my wife and I don't know exactly what it is, but it's coming into more clear focus.
Mm,
But we know that we've been called to something greater. We felt like we were in the corner in a fetal position, just paralyzed, didn't know what to
mm,
do, just making decisions to try and save our son's life. And then the magic of these prayer circles opened up this whole new possibility. And then, um, a mentor of mine had suggested, if we open our hearts and our eyes, that we were being called to something greater, and that we would be find new mentors, new cohorts, new guides on the road. We may reconnect with some old ones. We may let go of some old ones. And I almost remember it was Tony Robbins. I've worked with him for a number of years, and he's been such a dear friend on this journey. And it's so Tony Robbins of him to say. But at first I was like, "Oh, what are you talking about? Like, we're just paralyzed here." But almost within moments later, we bumped into someone on the street who encouraged us to look around, that there were angels here on earth helping us out. And this call to something greater is what's pulled us. And I feel like the idea of suffering is so interesting, because I feel like on the one hand, I want to I want to be present with the experience of it, but if I stay in the suffering, then I'm feeling paralyzed. If I could feel it I could carry pain, and maybe these are just nuances, then I have an opportunity to transmute that, or to share and grow. So I guess I'm not wrestling with, but sitting with, is where is the distinction? And the last piece I'll say about that, as I'm kind of babbling on, is I have this experience that's been rattling around in my mind this whole time, right? So I'm in these grief support groups, and more specifically, parents of children who are lost to suicide. And I in this Facebook group, I've been posting, and I've been blessed to share experiences of growth and beauty. Well, most of the shares are around pain, and most of the responses and likes and comments are it's empathizing, because we all have that shared experience. But I find for myself, if it's too much, then I'm pulled to suffering, and that makes me want to go into the corner and just get in the fetal position, where when there's some mix of the beauty or opportunity that's possible. So I think about this one woman who lost her child at the same time, and her posts are almost in parallel of mine, but constant pain, constant heartache, now 14 months. And I'm just like, how can this experience of suffering be understood and appreciated, but somehow unlocked in a way that the beauty can be experienced?
Well, I'm not a psychologist,
Yeah, I know.
but I will say that uh, it's really important to honor your own body signals
Mm,
and to titrate the taking in of others' suffering.
mm.
Um, One of my Buddhist teachers is Pema Chodron,
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
she she's a dear friend, and her teaching on Tonglen, which is the taking in of suffering, the taking in and sending back, the transformation of that suffering through our own experience of empathy and compassion and sending out, is an incredibly powerful tool. And be gentle with yourself.
Mm,
You know, I talked before about the bypassing phenomena. You know, let's spend the weekend doing mushrooms, and then we will somehow transcend suffering.
mm.
Easy, easy. Okay. We are supposed to do the work.
Yes.
In the same vein, we can become enamored of taking in grief as a means of empathy and compassion and ending the suffering of others. And that is true. But every medicine can be poison taken in the wrong doses, just like every poison can be medicine taken in the right dose. So be gentle and be mindful. And if it's too much to post or read those Facebook posts, turn the computer off.
Yeah.
Go out for a walk.
Yeah.
Grab your wife's hand. Go get ice cream with your daughter. Watch the sunset and cry. Look over I think you said it was your left shoulder, and see Anthony.
Yeah.
Okay? Do not rush your way to being the superhero. Anthony doesn't need you to be the superhero. I certainly don't. Your daughter still needs you to be dad.
Yes, she does.
And she doesn't need her life dominated by this process. She has her own grief she is going through. Hold her hand and watch the sunset or sunrise. You're in LA, so it's better to watch sunsets than sunrises.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm in San Diego, and it's
San
fascinating.
Diego.
A few things you mentioned about my son. It's fascinating. Over here is a couch in this studio with two seats, and I see Anthony and I see my dad. It's so powerful, and there's nothing my daughter loves more than jumping in the ocean and going to get ice cream. Since she was a little girl, first we would drive, then we would go on the e-bike together. Now she's about to drive and got a job at that very same ice cream shop we went to. But it's fascinating you said that. With all that's going on with my dad, she reached out yesterday and she's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm about to go back and see Papa, and I'm getting ready for this, these interviews tomorrow and this and that." I said, "Why do you ask?" And she's like, I just wanted to see if you wanted to go jump in the water, in the ocean." And I just responded, "Yes." And there's something about that feet in the sand, body in the salt water, being close with someone. And, normally she doesn't want to talk about her grief too much, but it was so powerful on the ride down. She was talking about the experiences of losing her papa, her grandfather, and her brother in such recency. And it's so profound. I'm so glad that you shared that, because my wife and I do feel compelled to help other people. But what I'm taking from you is more so than saying or doing or pressing the buttons, is living in this way and sharing in this way.
That's right. I mean, the
Yeah.
entire experience that you're talking about, you're having a full-throated human experience. Jumping in the ocean with your daughter, watching her proudly drive down the road, and all the freedom that it implies, watching a sunset as she connects again with pain, maybe anger, maybe sadness, maybe the totality of the experience, the guilt of surviving. All of it is part of the human experience.
Yeah.
Rumi says in his poem, The Guest House, this being human is a guest house. Welcome it all in as you would welcome the guests. This is how you will survive. This is how you will transmute this experience.
Well, and this is really, I don't know if the segue is the right word, but we're touching on something that I was really struck with you, is this idea of rituals. And we just shared some rituals, and you suggested some rituals. But Anthony, after Anthony's transition, I just I mean, wasn't like, oh, I'm going to start doing, but I've noticed I'm wearing his clothes, especially to the gym, hearing his wind chimes, certain songs come up on shuffle or on the radio that hit me just so, or even noticing angel numbers at the right moment. These become tiny anchors. And I know rituals are a core part of your work. I mean, can you share one or some that emerged from your own grief and how it helped you metabolize rather than bypass grief?
There's an experience I had, and I wrote about this in Reunion, which was my second book. And as you know, in Reunion, in Reboot, there's multiple layers, and in a sense, it chronicles in a memoir-like way my own experience of growing into adulthood, but really as an example of the ways in which we can use that process to become better leaders. In Reunion, I sought to go beyond my own experience as a leader and really think about my responsibility in a world that is so divided. And part of that experience was connecting to the experience of my father. In Reboot, I really connected to the experience of my mother, who was bipolar and who was really her mental illness was a dominant part of my childhood. In Reunion, I talk about my experience, my father's experience of finding out when he was 21 on his wedding day that he had been adopted, and his lifelong relationship with depression, his lifelong relationship with the grief of, in the way I empathetically imagined it, feeling rejected, not just by his birth mother, but by his adopted mother, who in her anger at him marrying my mother, stood at the back of the church and screamed out, "You're not my son, you were adopted."
I remember reading that.
Okay. So you asked about my experience of that. I live on a farm. My wife and I live on a farm in the middle of Colorado, outside of Boulder.
Awesome.
And there's a 185-year-old cottonwood at the center of the farm. And it's important to recognize the cottonwood's age because when that cottonwood started growing, the Arapaho were the indigenous people in that land. So that's how old this tree is. And while I was in the middle of writing that book, I would go out to that tree and I would talk to my father. And you can relate to this because you can talk to Anthony.
Yes.
My father would respond. And the ritual of sitting under that tree, and it's 10 feet around, this cottonwood, it's huge.
Right.
The ritual of sitting there in the embrace of that tree created the space for me to ask my father questions like, what was it like to feel what you felt? Why were you not there for me in the ways I needed you to be? And to come into relationship and to see the wholeness of who he was, not just the projection of whom I wanted him to be, but the totality of who he was. And so the ritual of doing that healed not only me, but actually welcomed my father back into my life in a way that was, I'm about to be a grandfather. I'm about to be a papa myself.
You sure are.
And I can't think of a better way to prepare myself for my granddaughter's arrival than to come into a new relationship with my own father. so that I can be that much more settled, that much more whole. So I can be an ancestor worthy of my descendants.
Wow. That's a powerful phrase, an ancestor worthy of my descendants. And what I'm also struck with when you're sharing about ritual the way that you are is there seems to be a connection also with nature, right? So we were talking about Facebook and posting, and that it's like, shut it, go outside. You're talking about connecting with your dad around that tree. And it's really crystallizing for me even more how important that is. I always feel a pull, especially it's close, so it's easier for me to feel a pull to the ocean. And while I'm not a surfer or anything, like I'll go down there and just stick my feet in the sand for half an hour, where it's sitting, meditating, swimming, or if I can't get down there, just taking my shoes off and putting my feet in the dirt in our front yard. And shortly after Anthony's transition, it seemed like camping, getting to the mountains, these places, whether it's the trees or I don't know, I don't know if it's the veil is thinner there or we're just, but what I'm taking from what you're sharing is, for folks like myself in my previous life and business leadership and sales leadership, I feel like the questions that I have here are like, what's the tactic? What are the things we do? What would you say? And each thing that you've shared with us really seems to be more about being than remembering to do something that you're sharing with us or putting yourself in a place to be.
Yeah. So you used a phrase that I want to bring your attention to, where the veil is thin.
Mm.
I think that that's a really important phrase, and I would like to tease it out. The phrase tends to refer to the veil between this life and the afterlife or the before life. But let's introduce a new word. The word is liminal. Liminal.
Liminal.
And liminal refers to the places where two different worlds or two different lands meet. Our experiences can be liminal. So the place where being and doing meet. If you envision, you talked about the ocean itself is not liminal. The earth itself is not liminal, but the beach is liminal. Because it's where these two worlds meet.
Yes.
Okay. If you remember from Reboot, where I tell the story about the importance of the chestnut tree. Mm-hmm. And the chestnut tree was one of the last surviving trees that survived the chestnut blight. And the blight had left this gaping wound in the tree, and I was small enough that I could step into the tree. And so it wasn't just nature. It was this little Brooklyn kid who was 1 foot in the tree and 1 foot out. That's a liminal space. And the thing about liminal experiences is it's something we can be uncomfortable. Am I on land or am I on water? Mm-hmm. Am I being or am I doing? Am I in my first adulthood or in my second adulthood? You remember midlife?
Yes.
Is a liminal time. Your daughter is going to go into a liminal time between adolescence and adulthood. And liminal times and liminal spaces combined with ritual are profoundly life-changing for the human species. When Aboriginal adolescents would go on their walkabout, it was at that time of life where they're saying goodbye to childhood and saying hello to adulthood. You are in a liminal space, my friend. Who you are as a father is changing, just as who you are as a son is changing. Yeah. And that's why you're drawn to this ritualized time.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what the Neil is going to be in 10 years. I'm in a liminal space. The other day I had a dream. I was at my son's wedding. My oldest son, not yet married. And I had to choose between a regular dark suit or a tuxedo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what the dream was about what persona will I be putting on now? What does it mean? I've moved from being a son alone to a husband, to a father, to soon to be a grandfather, or more specifically, to being an elder.
Yes.
This is a rich, powerful time for me. So this is a time of rituals.
Yeah.
Rituals support us in moving through liminal spaces to discover what is on the other side of that.
I'm so glad that this was teased out in this conversation. It resonates with me so much, and I feel pulled to liminal spaces in nature. I love to snowboard. It's something that Anthony and I were very different from one another, but snowboarding is something we shared together. And in this past season, our first not snowboarding together, although as a teenager he was much more interested in me taking him and his buddies snowboarding or being the one who could get them a place to snowboard. But either way, this last season, I just felt the pull so much more, where it's like I felt like I wasn't going to want to do it because I wasn't doing it with him. But the mountains feel like a liminal space too, because we're like so high up.
Between land and the sky.
Yeah,
Sure.
yes. And I feel his presence and connection so much more too. Gosh, that idea really resonates with me.
Mm. Pay attention to the liminal moments and the liminal spaces. If you can create ritual in that space, the magic, the mystery that will come to you will be very healing. I think that the distinction between the question of vulnerability and leadership and the experience of a teenager is actually a false dichotomy. Okay. And let me just start responding to what you're saying about vulnerability. A lot of folks think that the message I'm sending is like Brene Brown's embrace of vulnerability. And God bless her soul for raising the visibility on the question. But if you actually listen to my words and pay attention to what I wrote, I don't use the word vulnerability very much.
Mm-hmm.
The word I use is authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And let me be very Brooklyn and blunt.
Please.
Okay. The word that really matters is honesty.
Mm.
And if we think about the experience that we're talking about, the reason that we bypass, the reason that we are reluctant to be vulnerable is that we believe that the experience of being true to what we're feeling is somehow weak.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when we are led by people, whether it's in politically or in our communities or in our organizations, by people who hold that belief, we can tell they're bullshitting us. And it sucks. And if we have less power, we feel really angry. Now, I don't think that there's a better bullshit detector than a teenager. And the irony is teenagers live in a sea of bullshit. Okay? Every Instagram post, every TikTok post is like, my life is great, your life must suck. The thing is, they're really attuned at figuring out our bullshit. What they're not necessarily attuned at figuring out is everybody else's bullshit, their peers' bullshit. And so you want to elevate the word vulnerability. I want to elevate the word authenticity and add to it honesty. And let's imagine whether it's in business leadership or political leadership or family leadership or the experience of simply being human. What if we created a safe space where every one of us, whether we're 14 or 41, got to be exactly who we are? Let's expand it, okay? There are a whole bunch of folks who just by dint of their body or their gender identity or who they love are not allowed to feel like they belong in the world. For God's sake, what the fuck are we doing to each other? Okay? And to the teens, you know what the number one cause of death for trans teens is? Suicide. You know what the number one cause of death for men 35 to 65 is? Suicide. What the fuck are we doing to each other? Okay? So we all, one of the core principles in Reboot is that we're all organized for the pursuit of love, safety, and belonging. And after writing that book, a very dear friend of mine, Jason Scott Campbell, wrote to me and he said, Jerry, inclusivity is the felt sense of love, safety, and belonging.
Wow.
And when I used that to inspire myself to write the Reunion. And the subtitle of Reunion is Leadership and the Longing to Belong. Every one of us yearns to feel that we belong. Every one of us deserves to feel that we belong. That is a birthright of our humanity. And what binds us together, what does it feel like to belong? It means you get to be you.
Yes.
Fully and wholly. You know, we live in similar worlds. Lots of our friends do yoga, right? And they all say namaste, right?
Yeah.
What is the namaste means? The light in me sees and honors the light in you. However, you know how I like to interpret it, Neil?
Please tell me.
The mess in me honors the mess in you. I don't care if you have your shit together.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're imperfect. In fact, I'm much more interested in your lack of perfection, in the liminal space of you being in transition and becoming something new, than I am interested in being led by somebody who's got it all figured out. Because that's bullshit.
It's such bullshit.
Okay?
Such bullshit. Yeah.
And if we want to create a safe space for our children, we have to embrace our imperfection, our brokenness, our inability to have our shit together. Because if they see that we're okay with that, then they can be okay with that.
Mm.
So to me, that's how the whole thing comes together. For God's sake, we're human.
Yes, we are.
And I wouldn't have it any other way than for us to be human.
This resonates so much. And forgive me, I forget which book it was. I think it was Reunion, but this idea And I'm struck by how often I hear it from teens or leaders who think that they have to hold it together. But now coming to believe from reading and just consuming everything I possibly can, and now experiencing even real life, is that it's about that messiness, that being comfortable falling apart, but in a way that's with integrity, maybe creates more of a me too than so what. I'm here to lead because I've achieved A, B, C, and D. It's like, no, I'm messy, and this is clunky, but from it, this is what we could experience or open up.
That's right. If you remember from Reunion, one of the early stories I tell in that book is the experience I had after Reboot came out. So Reboot came out in June of 2019. Reunion came out in November of 2023. And while I was out on book tour with Reboot, I kept having this bizarre experience, and I continue to have it today. People respond to Reboot in exactly the same way, and you know where I'm going with this. I was in Dublin. I was doing a book reading. I was talking about the experience of what psychologists would call early parentification, when a child loses a parental figure and has to grow up early. Okay. So at the end of that talk, the room was filled with folks who look like me, white folks, a lot of them blonde-haired, blue-eyed, except this one woman. She was a Black woman, and she was right in the front row. She's become a dear friend, Joy Tunde Kangari. And she's nodding along and taking notes and doing all this stuff. And at the very end, she comes up to me and she says, that thing you were talking about, early parentification, that happened to me. And I was kind of groggy because I was on a speaking thing. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And she said, yeah, my father died when I was 13. And then she pauses and she says, on Robben Island. Now, Robben Island is where Nelson Mandela was held. It's a prison in South Africa. And she says, yeah, he was a freedom fighter based in Zimbabwe, and he'd crossed the border, captured by the police, and beaten to death. And then she says to me, your story is my story. Now, as we've determined, I grew up in Brooklyn, far from South Africa, far from Zimbabwe. But there is something incredibly powerful about me having exposed myself in a vulnerable, authentic, honest, no bullshit way that enabled this woman to reach across time and space and say, your story is my story. And to feel a connection, an empathetic connection that then enabled me to just listen to her and feel her experience, feel her yearning to belong. As you know, she contributed one of the essays at the end of the book about her own experiences. This is the gift of being honest and authentic. We can also look at the world and say, just like in the story of the Buddha and the mustard seed, every one of us have experienced loss. Why not use that fact to drive us together rather than apart? The powers that be right now in our world want us driven apart.
They do.
Okay? I'll be damned. I'm not going to be the ancestor my descendants deserve if I allow that kind of manipulation to prevent me from seeing that your story, Neil, is my story.
Yeah.
That's why when you wrote to me, the first thing I said was, I'm sorry I wasn't able to come out in LA and see you in person, but my first impulse was to say yes. Because what you and your wife are doing with this movement is important. And if someone had been doing this when I was a teenager, I may not have tried to kill myself. Feel that.
I feel it. I feel it. That's the call, Jerry.
That's it, man. That's the vocation. That's the calling from God.
It is. It is. I'm so very grateful, Jerry. And this, I feel like almost selfish. I want to stay on and on because it's been so helpful for me personally. And I know how transformational it's going to be for our audience. And thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for answering the call in the way that you did, and bringing your experience and wisdom, and helping myself and our audience connect in the most profound ways around what really truly matters most, and validating that we're on the right path. Us as adults, my wife and I will keep having experts on and doing this show, but it's really the work that we've been pulled towards in the past few weeks about opening us up for the kids, realizing how hard it is to get into the schools and get in front of principals and school districts to bring suicide prevention curriculum to the classrooms. What we've come to realize in actually interacting with the teens is they know how to help themselves. Their bullshit meter is totally going off with all of us adults. And so now what we're opening is places for them, and we're creating a studio where they can interview each other and other experts and share, and we could learn from them how to support them. And I've felt like I've needed more to be able to really facilitate that. And this conversation has just been so divine and timely. And I'm so very grateful, Jerry. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'll leave you and your wife with one piece of advice. Don't worry about being perfect. The effort matters, even if you fail.
Thank you. And that really ties to that last point you were talking about, the authenticity and honesty.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's,
if you will bear with me,
yes.
I'd like to read a poem by John O'Donohue. Do you know this poem?
I do not.
Okay. So John O'Donohue wrote a series of poems that are blessings, and they are in a book called To Bless This Space Between Us. And O'Donohue was a priest who really became best known as a poet. He left the priesthood. And this is a poem called For Grief. When you lose someone you love, your life becomes strange. The ground beneath you gets fragile. Your thoughts make your eyes unsure. And some dead echo drags your voice down where words have no confidence. Your heart has grown heavy with loss. And though this loss has wounded others too, no one knows what has been taken from you when the silence of absence deepens. Flickers of guilt kindle regret. Flickers of guilt kindle regret for all that was left unsaid or undone. There are days when you wake up happy, again inside the fullness of life, until the moment breaks, and you are thrown back on the black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back, you are able to function well. Until, in the middle of work or encounter, suddenly with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. It becomes hard to trust yourself. All you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way. and will find the right time to pull and pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. And when the work of grief is done, the wound of loss will heal. And you will have learned to wean your eyes from that gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all the time. John O'Donohue for Grief.
Thank you for sharing that, Jerry. It's fascinating because my wife wanted to participate in this, but just wasn't feeling up for it. And then we talk about how like grief always will find us, and we're just not hiding from it anymore. We welcome it, and it does seem to come at the most unexpected times. And that poem is such a powerful leave. Thank
I
you.
will send you a copy of it and give your wife my love.
I will.
Send your blessings to your dad and eat some ice cream with your daughter.
I sure will. You have my commitment. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much to Jerry Colonna for his wisdom, compassion, and courage in sharing such profound conversation about grief. If today's episode stirred something in you, whether recognition, sorrow, or a new way of seeing, you're not alone. Grief touches all of us, often quietly and invisibly, shaping how we live, love, and lead. We encourage you to explore Jerry's impactful work, especially his latest book, Reunion, which offers deep insights on embracing grief as a path to belonging and renewal. Following his teachings can support your own journey of reckoning and resilience. Whether you're navigating personal loss or supporting someone who is, we hope this episode gave you language, practical tools, and most of all, hope. If you or someone you know is struggling with grief or emotional distress, you can always text or call 988 for free and confidential support 24/7. To learn more and connect with a compassionate community around grief, presence, and courageous leadership, visit endurantmovement.org. There you will find ways to engage with this vital work and support healing on the journey. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might benefit. Let's build a culture where grief is met with presence and leadership is lived with heart. We'll see you next time on The Endurance Show.
Thank you for listening to The Endurance Show. If this conversation moved you, please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To view the conversations, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And to be a part of the community, follow us at Endurant Movement. And lastly, if you feel called to support the movement and help us ensure no teen ever feels alone again, visit endurantmovement.org to learn more, and if you can, make a donation. Together we can create lasting change, one conversation, one connection at a time.